What other films have they done?
Who wrote this? The writing is so good.
I love this movie.
I love this movie.
I love this movie.
Welcome to Deep Dives. Welcome back to Deep Dives. I'm your host, Mike, and today we're gonna kick off our series. I picked the first subject. His name is Christopher Nolan. For those of you who are unaware, who is Christopher Nolan? Well, Christopher Nolan is a director, a writer, and a producer. He's one of my personal favorite directors. Producers, I really haven't gone into too much. Writers, there's a ton of writers. For this show and for deep dives, I'm just going to deep dive into Christopher Nolan as a director. And that being said, I'm just going to cover a specific time period of his. I think if you deep dive into his career as a director, it goes beyond the time period that I'm going to cover. That time period is 2000 to current. So, and I chose that for a specific reason. I think the films that he has done within that range are the ones that most people will recognize. There's a couple films. I think there was one film that he did before that was this black and white film, very artistic, great reviews, great film. I actually did end up watching it. I'm not going to discuss it too much. I'm not going to cover it. Not to say that it's not worthy of deep dives or anything like that. I think I'm just going to concentrate on films that most people will recognize, the general audience will recognize. And if you don't, I recommend you go watch these films immediately. Turn this off, watch these films, and then come back to deep dives. That being said, like I said, I'm going to cover a range from 2000 to current, so 2017. Let me walk you through what he's done. So in 2000, Memento. Christopher Nolan directed. He co-wrote Memento with his brother. So Jonathan Nolan actually wrote a short story, and he wanted to adapt that short story into a film. Christopher Nolan was actually recommended by his brother Jonathan Nolan. They both stepped in and they wrote the screenplay. And lo and behold, Christopher Nolan directed the film. Great film. Great film. You might say, what kind of film is it? I'm not going to read the synopsis or anything. I would say you should check that out. What I will call it is more of a psychological thriller or mystery. Probably more of a mystery, investigative, psychological mystery. It's tough. It's tough to classify that movie as one thing or even two things in a lot of ways. What I will say is a phenomenal movie. I think it hit home with some people. It didn't hit home with others. But great movie in 2000. Definitely check that out. From 2000, go to 2002. He put out a movie called Insomnia. And Insomnia was actually written by Hilary Seitz. I don't know how to pronounce her name, and I should know how to pronounce her name, but either way, it actually wasn't written by him, or even co-written by him. And that's one of the few times you will actually notice that within his movies. Normally, he's a co-writer. He has writing credits to almost all of his films that he directs. And again, I'm going to say that with an asterisk. He has co-writing credits with all the films he directs. With Insomnia, this is one that he does not direct. He does not co-write. Anyways, so this one was interesting because Al Pacino and Robin Williams are in it, and Hilary Swank. So this one's a little interesting. It's this one I would say is more of a psychological thriller. Insomnia, it's a different background than Memento. Memento was more in the Southwest. This one is up in Alaska. It's got a different feel to it, a different purpose. It's completely different than Memento. And from those of you who have seen the movies, I'm not going to cover them all. There are movies that I'm going to pick out and cover in detail, and I'm going to deep dive into them. I'll explain that near the end of the episode. But there's completely different themes, everything, styles to these movies between Memento and Insomnia. Very good movie, Insomnia. I would recommend you check that out. So now we leave 2002 and we go to 2005. Batman Begins. All right, so we left the psychological realm. First, a psychological mystery, I'll call it. Investigative psychological mystery of Memento. Then to the psychological thriller of Insomnia. And within 5 years, he's brought up Batman Begins. So he's hit this comic book realm. So a lot of people, myself included, would say this kicked off one of the greatest comic book movies, you name it, trilogies ever. So especially in DCEU, that's just my personal opinion. Phenomenal film, Batman Begins, the Batman Dark Knight trilogy. So anyways, 2005, Jonathan Nolan, Christopher Nolan, and David S. Goyer actually co-wrote this film. Again, like I said before, Christopher Nolan definitely has some co-writing credits to this film. What you'll see here is this is his first cross with Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, Cillian Murphy. Phenomenal movie, great cast. And you start to notice the just caliber of actors working with Christopher Nolan. I mean, just look at that roster already. Within 5 years of someone, probably fourth film, third on my list that I'm covering right now. I mean, you have actors like Al Pacino, Guy Pearce, Hilary Swank, Robin Williams, Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman. I mean, just that level of people working with him. And it says something. And then the level of work, I mean, Memento was critically acclaimed. Insomnia was critically acclaimed. Batman Begins was a trendsetter. So, and I'm only up to 2005. That's 4 movies in. So, great movie, great resume just to this point within 5 years. First 4 movies. I mean, what director starts their career off? Usually a director will have 1 or 2 really good movies and you're not sure. At this point, looking back retrospectively, just a little bit of a deep dive into this track record is phenomenal. And we're just getting started. So let's kick it off from 2005 to 2006. So only a 1-year span. We go to The Prestige. We go from a comic book action hero movie to The Prestige, which is an illusionist movie. And not only that, but it's such an interesting take on illusionists. When you think about how you would direct and show an illusionist movie, a lot of that can be done CGI, and I think you lose the effectiveness of like illusion. I mean, so many things can be done on screen and in film. So how do you effectively show how good an illusionist can be over the screen? This movie, I'm telling you, this movie was amazing. And again, looking at it, Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan co-wrote it. Both have writing credits. Christopher Nolan directed it. Christian Bale again returns. Michael Caine returns. Hugh Jackman's there. I mean, it's interesting. A return of actors and then another great actor. I mean, the caliber of actors showing up in his movies, amazing. The illusionists in this film, 2 different types. I can't say enough about The Prestige. I can't say enough about it. Enough good about it, I should say. It was actually based on a novel, which is interesting. I didn't know that until I deep delved into The Prestige. It was based on a novel. It was an adaptation. So Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan. Jonathan Nolan is Christopher Nolan's brother, obviously. For those who didn't know, now you know. They adapted that book into a screenplay and created that film. That's one of the films I think is underappreciated. I think most people will appreciate Memento, but The Prestige, I don't know if people really appreciated that one as well. All right, so 2006, again, from 2005 and Batman Begins to 2006, The Prestige, only a year between those two. And I think people were still coming off that high of Batman Begins, and you go into The Prestige with Christian Bale. I mean, most people were seeing Christian Bale in this light of The Dark Knight, and now you see him as this illusionist. I'm not going to go into too much detail on those, and I'll tell you why again at the end. So from 2006, we go down to 2008. One of the most influential movies to hit the big screen, The Dark Knight. In 2 years, The Dark Knight comes back. So, again, writing credits. Let's start there. Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, David S. Goyer, all co-writing credits. Again, the return of the Dark Knight team for writing and directing. And you actually have the same acting team, you know. Now you add who? Everybody knows Heath Ledger, right? Gave such a performance in that film. I mean, you cannot say enough about that film. And Christopher Nolan had it, and it wasn't just the acting. It's everything about that film. I think it's probably one of the most intense and visceral films that's out there. So, you know, I don't want to skip over this one, but again, I'm not going to try to skip over it. But within a 2-year span, a director like that puts out something with such detail and intensity and just great films. I mean, already we have 5 films that are out there. Memento, Insomnia, Batman Begins, The Prestige, and now The Dark Knight within an 8-year span. I mean, that track record, that resume, deep diving into someone like Christopher Nolan, no wonder at this point, he has a track record that I think is understated but overwhelming. You know, and again, he's competing with people like Spielberg. He's competing with, you know, some high-end, you know, big name directors at this time, but he's putting out films that can stand toe to toe with anyone. All right, so, you know, from 2008, we go to the next film, Inception. I mean, you follow up The Dark Knight with Inception. Inception was a phenomenal, visually stunning movie. Absolutely stunning. You know, I think even in 2017, you're seeing films use the techniques that Christopher Nolan used. And Marvel right now is basically stealing some of the techniques from Inception, let alone the cast, the directing, the acting. Guess who co-wrote that? Let's just guess. Christopher Nolan was the only credited writer for that. I mean, it gets insane. It gets crazy to think about. I mean, how do you go from being the only person to write something like that? It's insane to me. He's the only writer for Inception, the credited writer. And not only that, but now he brings in Tom Hardy. It's the first appearance of Tom Hardy in his movies. Leonardo DiCaprio. Sorry, I didn't even miss that one. Michael Caine again shows up. No, sorry. Tom Hardy shows up. Ken Watanabe, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Cillian Murphy. You know, that movie, I think, in its own right was groundbreaking. And 2 years after The Dark Knight, only 2 years after The Dark Knight, do you get back-to-back films that just greatness greatness, groundbreaking. And performances by actors who, in their own rights probably should have swept at least accolades from, I don't know, Golden Globes and Oscars. They brought the performance. So not only does a director bring you, in these films at least, the visually stunning, everything to do with these films, but then also the performance. So we'll get to that. But, we go from Back to the Hero to now we have an action movie. But not only that, but even a different style of action. Some might call it sci-fi. I guess you could call it sci-fi in a way, but it's a different take on action and sci-fi. So, it's interesting going from that hero to that sci-fi. So it's not even following the same genre of movie again. And we'll get into that. We're definitely going to get into that. In 2008, Dark Knight. 2010, Inception. Now we go to 2012. We close out the chapter of Dark Knight. Dark Knight Rises. You bring back Tom Hardy to a cast that is just great. And you bring back the directing and writing team with Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, and David S. Goyer. I mean, it's insane how, I guess, talent attracts talent. I mean, that's the best way to say this, because you're bringing on new talent, but you're also keeping and retaining talent. That's still the caliber of people working with him, that as we go through this list, and even as I reread this list, you just see things. You start to see something. It's amazing, So from 2012 to 2014, so 2 years later, we go into Interstellar. And Interstellar was a complete switch from even The Dark Knight, from even Inception, from 4 years ago, from 2 years ago, completely different direction. And now, not only that, but now you bring on Matthew McConaughey, and you hide. How do you hide Matt Damon? Sorry, spoiler alert for those who have not seen Inception. It's a 3-year-old movie. I think you should see it. Interstellar for me is one of my favorite films from Christopher Nolan. And I'll go into that. I'm going to deep dive into why that is. But let's go into writing again. Christopher Nolan, Jonathan Nolan, co-writing credits. Right? The genre of this, what kind of genre is this? I would say it's purely sci-fi. It's purely sci-fi. This is a physicist's dream. If I was a physics teacher, this is something you would probably show your students. It's an engineering and physicist's dream. And it's amazing. And it's visually stunning, and it's realism. It doesn't do a ton of CGI. The robots weren't CGI. They were practical application. It was amazing to me. I'm going to deep dive into that one. But look who you bring on. You bring on this caliber of actor. You bring Matthew McConaughey after he had just done Mud, which was a phenomenal movie, right? You bring on Anne Hathaway. You still bring back Michael Caine. I mean, come on. Jessica Chastain, Casey Affleck, and this was within a 2-year time span. So I want you to think about something. Where have you seen some of these actors and actresses? Anne Hathaway came from the Dark Knight series again. Michael Caine came from a multitude of his Christopher Nolan's directed movies. Some might say, is that the studio? Is that the actors, the studio and the talent agencies pairing these people together and their contracts, and you must return to the studio, and the studio also locking down Christopher Nolan? Potentially it is a business side. But at the end of the day, to crank out the performances that you get, it's on the director. The writing, he has a co-writing credit. So to write this, to direct this, to get the level of performance from the actors, to get the continuity and stories, to get the I mean, just everything that he gets from these caliber movies. Again, I'm going to read this to you. 2000, we have Memento. 2002, 2 years later, we have Insomnia. 2005, we have Batman Begins. 2006, we have Prestige. 2008, we have The Dark Knight. 2010, we have Inception. 2012, we have The Dark Knight Rises. 2014, we have Interstellar. That resume, along with co-writing credits for Christopher Nolan, just speaks volumes. Consistency, groundbreaking. I can't say enough about it. So I can't actually, because I'm going to say a lot more. There's themes that you're going to see here, and I kind of touched on them a little bit. One, let's talk about these themes, and one of the common themes that you see are the actors. There's multiple actors that appear within his movies, multiple of his movies. I mentioned a lot of them already. Anne Hathaway, Michael Caine, Christian Bale, Cillian Murphy. Now we're looking at, Tom Hardy. God, I'm even running out of time and space here, but I can't even tell you how many actors and actresses go to and from. There's probably some that aren't even headliners that just keep coming back to him. Ken Watanabe, for one. And these are people who are Academy Award winners, Oscar winners, Golden Globe winners. They go back to Christopher Nolan and the level of performances that he gets from them. It's not like they go to receive a check because they know it's going to be a summer blockbuster that's a popcorn movie. So I think, the resume that he has, even the non-return actors. I mean, let's just name some. Al Pacino, Robin Williams, Hilary Swank, Christian Bale, again, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman. He's another return, actually. Jordan Gosling-Levitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, Matthew McConaughey, Anne Hathaway. One of my new favorites, who I think is really up and coming, Tom Hardy is probably one of my favorites out of the group, besides Matthew McConaughey, well, besides all of them. I mean, all of them are phenomenal actors. But you also look at Jessica Chastain. She's quickly becoming one of my favorite actors. I think, I'm not going to go in a hurry. Let me stop right there. I'm known to do tangents. So that caliber of actors, Guy Pearce, coming back in, Kate Moss, actually. Not Kate Moss. Carrie Moss. She was in Memento. I mean, that was his earliest film. So, it speaks volumes to a director who can not only consistently, again, put out this level of movie, but for this caliber of actor to not just show up and be cast, be willing to be cast, but also reoccur in different roles within a person's film, and then be directed to the level and the caliber of performance that they give speaks volumes. I mean, I think I don't know how he gets it out of those actors, because you've seen the range. Actors are usually only as good as two things: the directing, I should say three: the directing, the writing, and the editing. The actor can be great, but if the directing's not there to give them that direction, the acting's only a tool. The tool's only as good as the user or the director. Also, you're only as good as the words, so the writing. If the writing's not good, an actor can only bring that performance to a certain level. And you only have so much to work with. The writing is a tool of the actor. So the actor can only use that, be as good as a tool. And the editing. I mean, editing can make anything sound bad, look bad, choppy. I mean, it speaks volumes to what a director has to chair and cover and look at. So from the caliber of actors, I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, let's go over some of the top performances that he brings. We'll start at Memento. Guy Pearce brought it. And I'm just going to bring a few. I'm not just concentrated on some. Guy Pearce in Memento. Insomnia. Robin Williams and Hilary Swank really stole that. I don't mean to put Al Pacino out because he's a phenomenal actor, but I think Robin Williams and Hilary Swank really were the highest performing actors of that movie. Batman Begins. Christian Bale was great. Michael Caine and Gary Oldman. I mean, wow. Wow. So, The Prestige. Christian Bale was really great in that one. Hugh Jackman was really great in that one. I think everyone was on the same page in The Prestige. Now we go to The Dark Knight. I mean, come on. Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger brought a performance that was... I don't think people knew what Heath Ledger could be until that movie. And unfortunately, we'll never know his full potential. But again, Heath Ledger and everybody in that movie, but Heath Ledger was a product of his talent and the direction. So you have to give partial credit to the space that Heath Ledger was allowed to perform in. And that's the director, along with all of these. And then you go to Inception, Leonardo DiCaprio, the whole cast. That was a full cast. Yes, Leonardo was the lead, but the whole cast was great. Great. All of them. Phenomenal performances. Dark Knight Rises, again, Tom Hardy came in. Say what you will about that performance, that choice with the mask. I think they did some re-editing to make it sound a little bit more clear. Right choice to at least address that before it got to the point where you couldn't hear him. But great movie, great. I really enjoyed it. I think the choices made were good. It was a great closeout. And now you go to Interstellar. I mean, Matthew McConaughey brought it in that movie. I don't care what anybody says. Jessica Chastain, Anne Hathaway. I mean, she brought it in the Dark Knight series. Yeah, just the caliber of actors here. And it's due to the director. It really is facilitated by the director as well. Another thing, let's talk about this. Another thing, it looks like almost every 2 years he is doing a great film. And, a great film, not a film that seems to get him paid, but a great film. These films aren't some check in the mail. These are great films. So look at it. It's every 2 years. Memento, 2000. Next film, 2002. Next film, 2003. He took a 3-year break there. But from 2005 to 2006, he took a 1-year break. So if you kind of take the aggregate, it's every 2 years. And then from 2006, it's 2008, then 2010, then 2012, then 2014. It's every 2 years. Every 2 years, he puts out a film. And when does this guy take a break? And these are not easy films to do. So at what point, the director, again, I think maybe the producer probably has a longer relationship with the film, but at the same time, the producer isn't hands-on like the director. The director is there from start to finish. The director has their hands on everything. So during those 2-year gaps, I'm pretty sure, he is, and I'm not a director myself. Let me make that very clear. I'm not a director. I can't tell you a director's day to day or month to month or how they budget and plan and everything else. But I can tell you directors there day to day. I do know enough about the film industry to tell you this. They're the ones that own it. They're the ones that babysit the films. They're the ones that have their hands on it from start to finish, and they oversee every aspect of it. How they do it, what kind of personalities they do it, that's different between each director, and I think you can see that. Some are micromanagers, some are, willing to delegate, things like that. Some are perfectionists. That's different. But either way, these 2-year spans, Christopher Nolan is the director, and he is there from start to finish. So that 2 years is him working on this film. That's his film. So now we have the caliber of actor. We have, every 2 years he's putting out the same level of movie. I mean, if not better. Now we go to genre. And by that I mean, if you look at his movies, I don't think he's repeated himself once. And I know what you're going to say, but I'll address that in a minute. You're going to say the Dark Knight series. They're the same. And And I'm going to address that. So let's look at Memento. I'm going to classify Memento as a psychological mystery. Okay? Why? Well, let's go into it a little bit. Memento. A man who has no short-term memory and has to leave himself little mementos to make sure he remembers certain things that he forgot like 2 minutes ago. And so the whole film, you're trying to piece together what's happening, but backwards. And it's an interesting film. It's a psychological film. It's a mystery. You don't know what's going on. You don't know. You think you do, but you don't. And so it's a psychological mystery. It's very. It gets into your head, and you're always on top of yourself trying to figure out. And you think you kind of have it, but you don't. So again, I won't deep dive into each individual movie yet. That's what other movies or other shows are for. But this one is just going over Christopher Nolan. Insomnia. I'm going to call a psychological thriller. This is an investigation, a crime investigation, a psychological crime investigation. And Robin Williams is that guy who you just don't. Yeah, I won't deep dive into that one either. But it's I think it's the environment that you're put in, and this uncomfortable environment that you're put in that adds this element of being uncomfortable. But there's also this thriller aspect of it. So again, now you have the distinction between those two. But moving past that, now you go from the psychological standpoint to Batman Begins, which was completely different genre than the psychological one. So you switch gears in a matter of 3 years, completely switch gears as a director and as a film theme plot genre. You go to Hero. After that, within a year, you go to Prestige. From a Hero film, Dark Knight, you go to The Prestige, which is a film about illusion and deception. And, you might say that, what is the illusion? Or what is the prestige? Well, to me, it's bigger themes than that, right? It's a metaphor for many things. He lays out this plot for you. And is it a movie? Is it a metaphor for a movie, filmmaking? Potentially. But either way, it's completely different genre, completely different thought process, theme, everything than the Dark Knight Rises, or Batman Begins was, right? So, again, it's a switch. At this point, he hasn't done anything the same yet. We have psychological mystery, psychological thriller, which are pretty close, but if you watch those two movies, they have nothing in common, especially by the theme. I mean, Memento was done backwards, and you're guessing the whole time. Insomnia is a little bit closer to what you would expect from a murder mystery, but it's a psychological thriller, so it's a little bit different, and they're completely different. And then you go back to Batman Begins, which is this hero movie. Now you go to The Prestige, which is this illusionist film, and it's really about your commitment to something. Can you commit to something? How far are you willing to go? And then you go to Dark Knight, right? Which seems like it goes back to the hero theme. But I'm going to address that after something else. And from the Dark Knight, you go to Inception, which is another completely big change from Dark Knight, this comic book theme, to Inception, which is an action sci-fi, cerebral action. Right? It's not just a sci-fi. It's not just an action movie. It's not just find the bad guy and get them. It's a cerebral movie. And so going from, again, within a 2-year span, doing something different like that, it's amazing. Inception was an amazing movie. Not only that, but you brought something visually stunning, some new technology, the buildings moving, it's almost like The Prestige with the illusion, but now you bring Inception with what your mind can do onto the screen. It's a great movie. And now from Inception, you go back, and you almost switch gears, and it seems like you go back to the comic book film, right? Comic book hero film. So now it's time to address that real quick. All right, sorry, let's finish up. So now you go back to Dark Knight Rises, so this comic book feel again. And from there, in a 2-year span, you go to Interstellar, which, completely changes it. It's completely different than Inception, which was a cerebral, in your mind action. Now to Interstellar, which is this sci-fi out in space and time travel and space travel and end of the world type of feel and look and humanity and what, human nature and, it's an interesting kind of feel to what you see, common theme, but they're different. They're completely different directions and themes. And he co-wrote all of these screenplays. So let's address The Dark Knight real quick. And this is my take on The Dark Knight. Why are they different? They're so different. And it's a trilogy. They should be. But, for me, Batman this is just my view. Batman Begins was this real origin story. It was the beginning of when origin stories weren't such a bad word or I shouldn't say bad word, but such a mundane thing. Like, oh, it's just an origin story. This was one of the first times that origin story, you can call it an origin story. Before it was categorized as an origin story. And it was the Dark Knight, Batman, Bruce Wayne, confronting his own demons, right? He had to find out who he was first and then confront his demons, confront himself in a way. And now you look at the Dark Knight, he has to confront his greatest adversary. I mean, that's his greatest adversary now. It's a Dark Knight, which is a Joker. That's the greatest adversary, the one person who equalizes him in a lot of ways. It's a very different theme on a comic book character. And then you look at The Dark Knight Rises. It's a theme of aging. It's a theme of the twilight, that you see the light at the end of the tunnel in a way. So what do you do? How do you handle aging, and how do you handle humanity and death? Not even death, but humanity. I'm a human being. And at some point, this is going to end. How do I end it? And that's what Bruce Wayne was. That was his challenge. Yes, it was about other themes, but at the end, he handed off the mantle. Not only that, but he had to deal with being old and the toll on his body and other things. And yes, Bane was there. And yes, oh man, there was a couple other adversaries there. But at the same time, they're just different theme of who Bruce Wayne was as Batman. So for me, those were completely different films. Yes, they were within the comic book, but they were completely different. And it could be the writing, and to me, they were different enough. Yeah, he went back, but you can't do that all in one film. You probably could, but it'd be rushed. This was a Dark Knight trilogy, and in that sense, all three of them were different. That's just my perspective on it. So let's recap these themes, and let's speak a little bit about them. What does it mean? Well, I think Christopher Nolan, he rarely does the same thing twice. That's what I'm trying to say. And by that and through that, he challenges himself. He doesn't just do something generically. He doesn't do a psychological thriller like Memento. He challenges himself in that movie. He's going to do that movie backwards. And he's going to present something to you in the beginning, and he's going to film it backwards. He's going to challenge himself in that movie. He's going to do Inception. And he's going to do it multiple at a multi-layer cerebral thought process within your your consciousness. It's insane. He's going to do a Dark Knight series where it deals with the humanity of Bruce Wayne and Batman and his duality as a hero and a Dark Knight. I mean, he's the first one that, I'm not going to say he's the first one that called Dark Knight, but he's the first one in cinematic history to call him Dark Knight from a live action and really present that as, I'm the Dark Knight, let's find the White Knight, let's find someone who's different. How do I deal with humanity? How I'm a human. Bruce Wayne is human. And he brought that humanity, that human level to Bruce Wayne and Batman. Never been done. He challenged that perception of Batman. Then you go into something like The Prestige. You know, you have two sides here. You have one side where it's a traditional illusionist who can present something that's so fantastic. It's a trick that is resounding around the world. But he's also competing with a different illusionist who is obsessed with beating him and will go to the ends of the world and beyond to try to beat that trick and or mimic it. And the end there, I'm not going to ruin it for you yet. The end there is just so good because you don't see it coming. And I think it's a cerebral presentation of illusion through the film, which you could be so cheesy. There's been a couple magician films, Now You See Me, or whatever the heck that movie is with Mark Ruffalo. And I mean, that movie, yeah, it looked cool, but it didn't present the same illusion feel, the realistic, as if you're watching someone really pull off an illusion in front of you. You can tell it's more of the effects of a blue screen or something like that. Whereas if you watch The Prestige, it doesn't feel like you're seeing an effect of a cut edit scene. Christopher Nolan does that too. And he also makes you think about what's happening. You see obsession and you see human nature at its core in The Prestige. And in Interstellar to me, let's talk about it for a minute. Interstellar deals with so many things, so many levels. And father-daughter relationship, loss of a spouse, loss of a parent, end of the world, end of humanity. And I won't say environmental in a way, but it does. It's a cross of, we've hurt the earth so bad that now it's done, and we need to find a new home. And now you deal with space-time travel and the effects of space-time travel, and you bring in the realism of so many things, how that affects families and what cost to your own personal relationships would you take to save humanity? I mean, that's the question you have to ask as a parent. I'm a parent. Would I risk that with my own child to go save the world? It sounds super silly, and it sounds like it's been done so many times. And while it has in cinematic history, the way this is presented, you cannot take that for granted in this film. It's such a realism to that film, and I think most people have an issue with the third act. Fine, so be it. But what it's doing is bringing the humanity in. It's saying beyond the boundaries of what we know in science and things like that, there's still this human connection. So it's such a cerebral approach to this. That brings me to my second concept, which is the cerebral concepts and themes to normal topics. He doesn't just do something normal. He brings a cerebral approach to it where you have to think about it. And I've heard people say, you have to think when you watch his movies. You have to pay attention. And after you leave, what happens? You have to think about that movie. Which brings me to my third topic. And I'm covering that second one quick because I kind of mentioned it in the first thing. But my third thing is audiences have to rewatch his movies to understand all of it. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? I think that's a good thing. I think the J&L and I think general audiences like to be entertained. Yes, that's always a good thing. But it's good to also feel as though you've experienced something that you've never experienced before. You go to be what's the word I'm looking for? You go to be wild. You go to be entertained at times, but you go to see something new. Everybody wants to see something new. And in his world, you're seeing something new. You're seeing something big. You're seeing something that you've never seen before, and it takes you a minute to process it. It takes you a few rounds to process it. So, it might not be for the general audience at sometimes. But I think what us at the Justice Nerds League say, and what we're quoted as saying is, the best movies are the ones you continue to experience after leaving the theater. And I truly believe that. You leave his movies, you leave the theater, and you're still thinking about it. You're still wondering what's going on. And I'll give you a couple examples. Memento. Do you truly understand what happened? Do you get the switch of why he did what he did, but do you truly still understand all the intricate details? I don't know if he gives it all away. Probably one of the most famous ones that I think everyone talks about is Inception. At the end, when they have the spinning top, most people still argue to this day it flickers. So was he still in the dream or was he not? I mean, he leaves and that's an open-ended thing, but you still have to think about what layers there are. And Interstellar, another example. What is that third scene about? Who are those others? Who are the third, fifth dimension people? Are they humans in the future? Did he see him when he saw himself going through the wormhole? Did he see himself? And how is he going through the wormhole? I mean, you really have to watch this movie 3 or 4 times to just get the appreciation out of them. The Prestige, you really need to understand what's happening. It's his movies show dedication, right? A lot of his characters are dedicated to something. And he almost expects the audience to be dedicated to these films in order to understand. And it's not like he's preaching to the audience in a way. He's not trying to teach them something. He's entertaining you through a cerebral approach where you are thinking something. You have to understand it. It's a material that's beyond simple comprehension. It's a material and it's a perspective on something that's thought-provoking, and that you have to use your brain. And some people don't like that, and that's okay. But for me, I love it. I love it. That's why Christopher Nolan's one of my favorites. He's one of my favorite directors. Final theme is, I think he uses realism. He doesn't use a lot of CGI. He uses practical effects. He can put you in a scene. He goes to locations on Earth, and he uses those locations as, in Interstellar, he goes to Iceland, and he goes to this glacial place, and he makes it look like it's a different planet with floating mountains, and he goes to the ocean, and it makes it look like a planet with ocean waves, and he goes to, for Inception, Inception was probably the biggest one for him where he used CGI, but he did it in such a way that no one's ever seen it, where buildings are folding over each other and giant mirrors are coming out of nowhere, and you've seen that in practical effect. So realistically, it looked like something you'd seen at a carnival where you fold mirrors against each other and you see an infinite number of yourself at a different angle. So it didn't even have, it was such a practical realism to a special effect. That's a concept that even as I'm saying it just gets to me. The Dark Knight you could do the Dark Knight in so many different ways, where you show him disappearing and you show him reappearing in shadows, but he brought the Dark Knight to the point where he wasn't over teched with this CGI technology. No, he used it was like real technology. And when he disappeared, he actually disappeared into the shadow. It was just such a great practical effect that kept you as the audience member into the scene and into the landscape and into the environment. And then he also brings the caliber of acting on top of that. So now you're in the landscape, now you're into the effects, nothing's bringing you out of the effect, but then you bring the caliber of actor in it. And not only that, but because of the caliber of acting in it, you forget that person was already in a different role. You lose the fact that, hey, that's Anne Hathaway from Catwoman. Now this is Anne Hathaway, the astronaut. This is not Michael Caine, from a multitude of movies that he's in, The Prestige, where he's trying to talk Hugh Jackman out of something, but now he's, in The Dark Knight and you forget about that, or he's, and just so he's the physicist in Inception, right? It's such an engaging approach, and it's so refreshing, and it's groundbreaking. And it's almost underappreciated because it's so ahead of its time, and it's so cerebral. And I'm not on the fan wagon. I mean, I think you have to appreciate quality and greatness when it's there in front of you. But to deep dive into something like that, I mean, I could probably go on for a couple hours, but I don't need to. I'm just touching on certain things. I'm just touching on Christopher Nolan, his themes, his humanity themes, his ability to go into challenging himself as a director and trying different genres of film. His cerebral approach to common themes that seem common, but when you watch these films, you have to watch it multiple times to even understand what just happened in this film. Did I understand everything and catch everything? And then bring in the caliber of talent, not only to be cast in his films, but then the level of performance that they give and the cinematography. And don't get me started on the scores. I mean, the scores. I didn't even talk about that. The scores and the level of writing and the production. The scores alone in these films are something to get nominated, and some of them were. And the writing was nominated. The editing was just fantastic, and the plots are amazing. And yes, there's some, there's some times where I think he can drift off between acts. The Dark Knight Rises was not a perfect film. Some of these films are not perfect films, and you have to accept that. Most people will say Inception was not a perfect film. To me, it hit home with a lot of the themes. Not everything's going to be answered for you. But giving credit when credit's due, when you deep dive into something and you understand it a little bit more, I think you appreciate it more. And for me, I appreciate Christopher Nolan's films more. Him as a director, as a writer, and him as just a leader in these films. So, given that, I'm doing this because Dunkirk in 2017 is coming out. And it's a new genre for him. It's a war film. And it's coming out within a 3-year span instead of 2 years. So he's staying on theme again. He has a new theme, a war film, and he's still within that 2 to 3 year mark. And Cillian Murphy and Tom Hardy are in it. So same caliber of acting. I'm hoping that it's gonna be good. Sounds like the scoring, I think it's Hans Zimmer again. I know that he co-wrote it. I know it's based on I don't know if it's the writing and the plot is based on the original Dunkirk movie, because there was one in the 40s or 50s. But the Justice Nerds League is gonna actually do a review on that one. Speaking of which, in anticipation of that movie, I picked a few Christopher Nolan movies that I'm gonna deep dive into specifically in anticipation for Dunkirk. First one I'm gonna do is Memento, and I'm gonna bring on a special guest for that one. Then I'm going to do The Prestige, then I'm going to do The Dark Knight, and then I'm going to do Interstellar. So with that, I just want to say thank you for listening to Deep Dives, and I will catch you on the next episode. Take care.